The journey across the unforgiving lowlands had been damp, uncomfortable, and endless. A perfect precursor to the exile Miss Eleanor Ashworth felt was awaiting her. She had been dispatched from the polished drawing rooms of London, a political inconvenience, to the wild, windswept peaks of Scotland, a place she considered the very edge of civilization. Her father, a prominent but disgraced diplomat, had bartered her temporary wardship to the most remote laird he could find, a man known more for his claymore than his courtesies. Eleanor was a creature of intellect and silk, trained in the arts of diplomacy and the subtle control of a London salon. She knew nothing of the granite heart of the Highlands. She clutched a leather-bound book, the only shield she possessed against the looming landscape, which seemed to grow darker and more brooding with every mile her carriage covered. The storm met her at the border of Clan MacLeod's territory, a furious onslaught of rain and wind that seemed to welcome her with malice, shaking the carriage like a child's toy. By the time they reached Castle MacLeod, the massive stone structure looked less like a home and more like a craggy, ancient fist hammered into the earth, impervious to time and hospitality. Interior was vast, firelit, and dominated by furs and weapons. It smelled of peat, damp wool, and an underlying scent of danger she couldn't quite place. She was ushered into the great hall, dripping and exhausted, her carefully constructed poise wavering under the oppressive silence of the clansmen assembled. Standing before the blazing hearth was the man who held her immediate future in his hands, Laird Alasdair MacLeod, the chieftain of 1,000 years of fury. Alasdair was every inch the Highland chief tall, powerfully built, with dark hair tied back from a formidable brow and eyes the gray of a winter sea, wore a simple tartan vest, and his presence eclipsed the warmth of the fire, radiating a stern, unbroken command that chilled Eleanor to the bone. Miss Ashworth. His voice was a deep baritone, possessing the harsh, lyrical cadence of the Gaelic tongue, utterly foreign to her English ear. "You are late," Eleanor curtsied, ignoring the tremble in her mud-splattered silk gown. "The storm delayed us, Laird. I trust my papers arrived safely." He gave a single, dismissive nod, his gaze raking over her a look that felt less like assessment and more like the measurement of a potential enemy. "Your papers confirm you are a ward of the crown until your 21st year. You are here to keep my lowland rivals pacified. You're not a guest, but a commodity." His bluntness was brutal, lacking the polite deceit she was accustomed to. "And you, Laird MacLeod, are a jailer," she retorted quietly, her temper flaring despite her fear. Alasdair offered a tight smile that was colder than a December frost, a necessary one. "My clan has suffered enough from the intrigues of your lowland diplomats. Rest assured, I trust you not at all." Their arrangement was one of mutual, thinly veiled hostility conducted over silent, heavily supervised meals of hearty Highland fare that Eleanor barely touched. She was given a cold tower room overlooking a dramatic sheer drop to the sea, constant reminder of her isolated situation. Yet, as the days passed, Eleanor began to observe the life of the clan, finding a strange, rugged beauty beneath the laird's forbidding exterior. Loyalty the MacLeod people showed Alasdair was absolute. They did not fear him, but revered the heavy burden of responsibility he carried for them all. She watched as he settled a dispute between two tenant farmers with a fairness that surprised her. Showing a wisdom far exceeding the brutish image she held, she spent her mornings in the castle library, organizing the ancient, dusty MacLeod documents, attempting to find distraction in logic. Alasdair, having heard of her diplomatic training, threw her the estate ledgers, confusing tangle of Gaelic notations and bartered goods. He expected her to fail, to flounder in the complexity of the Highland economy, giving him reason to dismiss her as useless. Instead, Eleanor applied her meticulous training, reorganizing the books, identifying a serious debt issue that threatened the very foundations of the clan's prosperity. She presented her findings to Alasdair a week later, detailing the solution with crisp, irrefutable precision, showing she was more than silk in manners. Alasdair stared at the clear, concise report, his gray eyes widening slightly, a flicker of grudging respect replacing the hard suspicion. "You are more than a liability, Miss Ashworth," he admitted, the reluctant praise echoing in the high ceiling of the study. "You have a mind. Use it only for the benefit of this house. Despite the slight thaw in his opinion, the cultural divide remained wide. One evening, Alastor caught her trying to sneak out a medicinal herb she desperately needed. He stopped her, assuming she was stealing silver or attempting to send a coded message. His fury was immediate and intimidating. "What is this? Espionage, Eleanor?" he demanded, using her name with a sharp edge grasping her wrist, his grip like iron. "It is not espionage, Laird," she hissed, pulling back. "It is a simple request for the herb fever few. The castle cook's daughter suffers from debilitating headaches." Alastor hesitated, seeing the genuine concern in her eyes. He released her, chastened, realizing his suspicion ran too deep to trust even simple acts of kindness. The true turning point came days later, during a necessary, difficult re-roofing of the stables under a chilling October sky. Alastor worked alongside his men, pulling heavy timber. Demonstrating the hard labor required of a true laird, a sudden slip sent a heavy beam crashing down, pinning his left leg with a sickening audible crack that silenced the entire courtyard. The men rushed him inside, and Eleanor, having witnessed the accident, immediately took command of the frantic situation, her medical knowledge overriding her fear. She set the broken bone with steady, precise hands, ignoring the laird's muffled curses and the stunned faces of his clansmen who expected to see her flee. For the first time, Alastor was physically vulnerable, forced to rely on the Lowland woman he had publicly scorned and privately distrusted. As she kept vigil over his feverish sleep, cleaning and redressing the wound, Eleanor saw the fine lines of strain around his eyes, the deep-set weariness of a man always on guard. He woke in the darkest part of the night, his voice hoarse. "Why did you not let me bleed for my arrogance, Eleanor?" "Because I have no need of a debt I cannot collect, Alastor. And the MacLeods need their laird whole," she replied simply, refusing to accept any false drama. He shifted, wincing, and finally offered the smallest window into his soul. "Every inch of this land is held by a treaty stained with MacLeod blood. One misstep, and the Lowlanders will seize it. They seek a reason to call me incompetent, a tyrant. You, Eleanor, are the strongest evidence they need of my weakness, a hostage I cannot control." He confessed the constant pressure, the sleepless nights spent protecting his people from the very governmental forces she represented. Eleanor gently wiped the sweat from his brow. "I am not the crown, Alastor. I am merely a woman who can read ledgers and mend bones. I want no part of your people's pain." That night, the suspicion was finally washed away by the tide of shared humanity, replaced by a desperate, fragile respect. Alastor, seeing her dedication and intelligence, finally realized the danger was not from her, but to her, should his enemies find out how invaluable she had become. The external conflict erupted when a stern, uniformed official, Mr. Henderson, arrived from Edinburgh, claiming to represent the new king's commissioners. Henderson was an oily, ambitious man who questioned the validity of Alastor's land deeds, implying that the laird was mismanaging royal assets. "It is clear, Laird MacLeod, that you are not fit to oversee these assets, especially given your recent incapacitation. And your English ward, Miss Ashworth, must return to Edinburgh immediately." The threat was obvious. Isolate Alastor, seize the lands, and divide the Clanaclassic Lowland maneuver to extinguish Highland autonomy. Alastor, still recovering, felt a fury he could barely contain. Henderson was legally correct enough to be dangerous, and the MacLeod's ancient claims were worthless in a London court. Eleanor stepped forward, a vision of composure in the storm-battered hall, her eyes flashing with a protective fire. "Mr. Henderson, I assume the commissioners still respect the letter of the law?" she inquired, her voice deceptively soft, invoking the language her father had taught her. "The MacLeod family debt, which you cite as evidence of mismanagement, was accrued by the previous laird. My calculations," she presented her carefully prepared report, "show the laird has already reduced the principal by 30%. She used her precise, aristocratic voice to dismantle Henderson's entire argument, citing legal precedents and financial statutes he clearly hadn't bothered to memorize. Henderson was visibly shaken, unable to counter the polished, authoritative diplomacy coming from the supposed captive English girl. "Furthermore," Eleanor continued, her chin raised, "the Crown's charter regarding the wardship of my person is clear. I remain here until my majority, unless I petition otherwise." She met Alastor's grateful, stunned gaze, making the silent declaration, "I am not leaving. I choose this place, and I choose you." Henderson was forced to retreat, his plans for seizing the estate postponed but not abandoned. The victory, though costly, was hers and theirs. Later that evening, the storm outside had broken, and a clear, cold moon shone over the Highlands, illuminating the ancient castle. Alastor was leaning heavily on a crutch, slowly making his way to the great hall where Eleanor was mending a tear in his MacLeod tartan. He stopped just behind her, inhaling the scent of lavender and book parchment that always clung to her, contrast to the smoke and salt of his own life. "You chose to stay," he murmured, the words heavy with disbelief and awe. "You could have bought your freedom with my destruction." Eleanor looked up. Her needle paused. "Freedom is worthless if it requires abandoning those who are right. My heart belongs to justice, Alastor, and justice belongs to this land." He dropped his crutch and reached for her, pulling her close, his arms wrapping around her waist. The awkwardness of his embrace eclipsed by its profound necessity. "You are the bravest heart I have ever known, Lowland or Highland," he whispered, his rough cheek resting against her soft hair. Their affection, born not of convenience but of shared battle against a common enemy, was fierce and unwavering. He realized that his duty to the land was inextricably linked to his duty to her heart. They were no longer separate burdens, but one single sacred trust. The following week, Alastor, his legs still healing, prepared for the next confrontation, knowing Henderson would return with more force. Eleanor proposed a bold, simple plan. Alastor must legitimize their union immediately, binding her to the clan and legally severing her ties as a crown ward. "If I am your wife, I am no longer property to be transferred. I am MacLeod, and you have the right to keep your wife by your side, Laird." Alastor knew the move was dangerous, potentially provoking the crown, but he could no longer bear to face a future without her quiet strength. "Be aware, Eleanor," he warned, his eyes grave. "To marry me is to marry the storm. The struggle will not end with a wedding. The struggle is worthwhile if I am standing beside you," she vowed, meeting his gaze with the pure, fierce loyalty that only a true partner could possess. The marriage ceremony was quiet, performed by the local minister, surrounded only by the MacLeod faithful, a profound contrast to her sterile London wedding. The simple joining of hands felt like the forging of iron, a bond made not of law, but of elemental necessity. When Henderson returned weeks later, with documents demanding Eleanor's immediate recall, he was met with a united front. Alastor presented the signed marriage papers, formally binding the Lowland woman to the Highland name, making her untouchable by the Crown's wardship laws. Henderson raged, but his legal argument was defeated by the simplest of unions, a Highlander's oath to his wife. The official was forced to accept defeat, retreating back to Edinburgh with only his bitter report to show for his efforts. Peace, tentative and hard-won, settled over the castle, but the deep, abiding quietness between Alastor and Eleanor was anything but restful. Their relationship deepened over the long, stormy winter nights, built upon respect for each other's unique strengths, his loyalty to the earth, her mastery of the word. Alastor learned to trust her counsel implicitly, knowing she would never betray the land she had come to love as fiercely as he did. Eleanor, in turn, found a profound, passionate fulfillment in his protective embrace, knowing that his gruff exterior hid a tenderness reserved only for her. She no longer saw the castle as a prison, but as a sturdy, warm sanctuary, guarded by the strongest man she had ever known. Their hearts, once separated by miles of political distrust and cultural bias, were now woven together like the threads of his clan's tartan. The Laird of the Highland Storm had finally surrendered to the woman with the steadfast Lowland heart. He kissed her not with the formality of a duke, but with the fervent necessity of a laird who had found his true anchor in the raging sea. Their union proved that the most important duty was not to a flag or a title, but to the truth of one's soul, which yearned for companionship and acceptance. Eleanor became the true diplomatic duchess of the MacLeods, her intelligence protecting the clan better than any wall of stone. Alastor realized that true strength wasn't found in his solitude, but in the vulnerability he shared with his wife. The greatest conflict they overcame was the one within themselves, breaking down their own walls of pride and suspicion. Their story was a testament that love transcends borders, loyalties, and the harsh judgments of history. The MacLeod castle stood firm against the wind, not just because of its granite foundation, but because of the Lowland heart beating strongly within its walls. For more stories where duty meets destiny and love triumphs over all, be sure to comment, like, share, and subscribe to Storycraft Studio.